I want to talk about ambiguity and literary writing. In non literary writing, generally the goal is clarity, the desire to communicate as directly as possible a message. And in, say, journalism, business writing, ambiguity would not be appropriate, given that your purpose, again, is to be clear and communicative. But in literary language, often ambiguity can be very powerful. Well, why? Well, one reason is we can say that one element of literary language is to reflect what it feels like to be alive. And probably most of us know that life tends to be more ambiguous than clear. Think of how many decisions you've made so far in your life, difficult decisions, and how in most of those cases you face two equally desirable possibilities, and you wonder, how can I decide between the two? There's ultimately no reason that one possibility is better than the other. So you have to choose based on what? Whim, uh, chance, and you realize that you make a decision good not when you're making it, but in retrospect, by having made choices after the decision that make the decision turn out to be a good decision. Well, F. Scott Fitzgerald, in his famous nonfiction essay, The Crack Up, says that the mark of a well ordered intellect is the ability to hold two diametrically opposed ideas in the mind at the same time. This is a version of the famous passage in one of John Keats's letters where he says that the great poets, in particular Shakespeare, possess what he calls negative capability, which is the ability to rest in doubt and uncertainty without any irritable reaching after fact. And you can think of a Shakespeare play in this regard. Where is Shakespeare? He is the characters. In King Lear, he is Cordelia. He is Kent. He is Lear. He he so fully immerses himself in his characters that his individuality, his ego is gone. This certainly, I would imagine, have led to feelings of ambiguity in a writer like Shakespeare. He probably asked, well, who am I if I'm all these people at one time? So, ambiguity can manifest in literature in all kinds of ways. A very basic way would be pun. We can think of Keats's first line of his famous Ode on a Grecian Urn, "Thy still unravished bride of quiet." Well, you look at the word still there, it suggests the urn is not moving, it is motionless, but also it suggests a kind of temporality, a sense of durability. It remains, it is still there over time. So there's a sense that both the urn is static, it doesn't move, but yet, weirdly, at the same time, it moves with all time and does not fade. We can also look at the adjective, unravished. Well, on the one hand, this word suggests that the urn is somehow pure. It's not been sexually assaulted. It's not had sex. So in Keats's time, this would have been a mark of virginity, a mark of chastity, a mark of purity, and in this case, it seems to be a virtue of the urn. But if we look up the etymology or the word origin of ravished, we see it also comes from the same root as the word rapture, enraptured. So the urn, even though it's pure, has also not experienced some of the great ecstatic joys of life. So Keats uses ambiguity here to give his lines a kind of mystery, a nuance, a subtlety, a depth, we could say. That, of course, is true of the urn itself. He looks at the urn, and it is ambiguous. It suggests eternity, which is what a poet might want his art to aspire to, but also it suggests a kind of coldness and aloofness that seems divorced from the very fleshy flux that generates art in the first place. So we could come up with all sorts of examples of how ambiguity exists. Now, the question is, why, in writing literary language, would one value ambiguity? Well, I would say again that one of our goals as creative writers is to write about what it feels like to be alive. And to me, anyway, uh, it, life feels like one constant ambiguous moment after another. And of course, ambiguity does invite us to think more actively than we would if we did not face ambiguity. Ambiguity does lend our life a kind of mystery, a glimmer, a nebulousness that can be beautiful and inviting. But of course, ambiguity can also be very frustrating because it doesn't give us what we want. I think that as writers ourselves, we're not necessarily going to set out to write ambiguous literary nonfiction, but I think that we'll want to be careful in writing our conclusions in particular, not to tie things up in a neat little ribbon and tell the reader what the main meaning of your essay is. Uh, that takes away that power of ambiguity. I read somewhere that one of the old time editors of the New Yorker magazine, when writers would turn in their short stories for the weekly short story publication, the editor would just take away the last paragraph and leave that feeling of things aren't quite finished or completed or tied up. Um, Again, that can be very electrifying for a reader. Now let's be clear: ambiguity is not the same as confusion. If I get to the end of an essay and I think, what the hell's going on here? Um, I don't even know what possibilities are in play. I don't know what meanings I'm trying to choose among. If there's this just kind of jumbled cloud of information, well, that's not what we're going for here. I think ambiguity, if confusion is a lack of meaning, a lack of clear meaning, then ambiguity is in some ways a profusion of meaning, where when I get to the end of an essay, say, of course, this could take place at any point in the essay, I think, oh, well, this could possibly mean this. It could possibly mean that. Maybe that, maybe that, maybe that. A kind of profusion of meanings, and where it becomes difficult to choose one meaning as more valid than the other. Does this mean that the essay is meaningless? No, it means that the essay is a rich capturing, again, of what it feels like to be alive. So as we are reading essays by some of the great essay writers, we will encounter ambiguity quite often. Think in particular of James Baldwin, the Baldwin essay, Notes of a Native Son, that we read last week, and how ambiguous the final sentences of that essay are, and thinking about the complexity of his relationship to his father. It's hard really to get a sense of exactly what he feels, because he feels so many conflicting things. So we'll note ambiguity in those we read, but also as we're writing, again, literary nonfiction, I think we want to be careful to be attuned to the mysteries and the nuances and subtleties of our lives and the world around us, without trying too hard to reduce our experience to one clear meaning, one clear moral.